The night is almost over. The fire in the center of the longhouse has burned down to glowing embers, a faint orange beneath a blanket of ash. This is where you wake, not in a private room, but in a smoky, crowded hall that holds an entire family's existence. The first thing that hits you isn't sight, but smell. Sharp wood smoke is woven into your woolen blankets, into your hair, into your very skin. It mingles with the scent of dried fish hanging from the rafters and the faint, sour tang of ale. The longhouse is warm, but the price is lungs that sting every morning as you cough out the soot gathered overnight. You rise from a rough bed of straw stuffed into a sack topped with animal skins. Privacy is a word you don't know. To be a Viking woman is to live in closeness to family, to work, and even to the animals whose body heat helps keep the hall from freezing. Dawn hasn't broken, but your day begins now, measured not by a clock, but by necessity. Your first duty is the hearth, the heart of the longhouse. If the fire dies, the hall grows cold, food cannot be cooked, and spirits sink. You kneel beside the embers, hands blackened as you coax the glow back to life. It's a battle as tense as any raid. The smoke gathers at the roof, seeping down into your lungs. Historians believe Viking women suffered chronically from smoke inhalation. Each breath here carries a hidden cost. Could you start your day wrestling with ash and flame, coughing in the dark? Now, food. Forget the cinematic feasts. Breakfast is humble, often just barley, porridge thick, plain, and filling. If you're lucky, it's sweetened with a spoonful of honey. But before that porridge can be eaten, someone must grind the grain. That's your job. 2 heavy stones, turned by hand, slowly crushing kernels into flour. It's repetitive, exhausting work. The skeletons of Viking women show severely worn-down joints, a story of unseen labor etched into their very bones. As the sun finally rises, you step outside, but it's not for freedom. It's for more chores. Livestock must be tended, water carried from icy streams, fishnets checked. Your hands are red and raw. Meanwhile, the men may be gone raiding for months. The entire household, the farm, the children, it all depends on you. You are the spine of the longhouse. When we hear of Viking heroes, the women's names are often missing. Yet, who kept the farms alive while men raided? Who spun the wool that became the sails for their ships? Who raised the children who grew into warriors? The Viking woman's survival wasn't about conquering lands, but enduring them. That endurance began every single morning in a smoky longhouse with aching arms and the weight of an entire world on her shoulders. So, I ask you again, would you survive even one dawn in her world? Imagine it. The world outside is still wrapped in darkness. The long Scandinavian winter night stretches on, and inside the longhouse, the air is thick with smoke from last night's fire. The smell of wool, damp earth, and dried fish hangs in the air. It isn't the warriors who stir first. It is her, a Viking woman, the figure history's sagas so rarely center. She wakes before the shouts of chieftains, her battle different, unrelenting, and absolutely necessary. Throwing off her rough wool blanket, she feels the immediate bite of cold on her skin. The floor is hard-packed earth. Around her, family and kin huddle together in sleep. Her husband rests nearby, his sword always within reach. But she doesn't reach for a weapon. She reaches for her shawl, her purpose already clear. She kneels by the hearth, her hands roughened from years of labor, and coaxes the dying embers back to life. A soft orange glow sparks, and she feeds it with kindling until flames rise, filling the room with a faint crackle. The longhouse breathes with her. The animals stir as the firelight grows. A goat shakes its head, a cow moves softly. Before porridge can be made, before her children can even stir, there is water to fetch, always water. She pushes open the heavy plank door, and the cold slams into her like a wall. Snow crunches under her boots as she walks the familiar, treacherous path to the stream. Ice coats the surface, and she cracks it open with a stone. Her reflection stares back, hair messy, skin pale, eyes already weary, though the day has barely begun. The walk back is heavier, her shoulders straining under the weight of the sloshing bucket. Every drop matters. By the time she returns, the longhouse is warmer. She sets the bucket down and begins the next task. Porridge. Grain boiled in water until it's thick and hearty enough to sustain them. The sound of her stirring the pot is rhythmic, almost meditative, a constant in a world of uncertainty. Soon, the longhouse wakes. Children tumble from their furs, drawn to the fire's warmth. The older ones rise to help with chores, learning the rhythms of survival. Her husband wakes last, stretching and scratching his beard, and looks directly to her, expecting his world to be in order. And it is. She hands him a bowl of porridge, and he eats quickly. Her work is invisible precisely because it is expected. But her morning is far from over. The animals are waiting. She takes a pail to the far end of the hall, where the cow greets her with warm breath. She milks it, her daughter watching closely, learning the motions that will one day be hers. This is how knowledge is passed down, not in sagas, but in quiet moments between mother and child. We often romanticize Viking life, the raids, the ships, the glory, but none of that exists without her. None of it is possible if she fails. She is the foundation. No skald sings of her rising in the smoke-filled dark, hands raw from icy water. No runestone tells the tale of porridge and pails. And yet, as the first gray light of dawn pushes against the smoky dark, there is a quiet satisfaction in knowing the household runs because of her. She may not be sung of in the sagas, but this endless rhythm of labor is its own kind of power. It is she who ensures survival. The warriors may sail, the chieftains may boast, but without women like her, there would be no Viking Age at all. Her work is never done. The bowls must be cleaned, clothes mended, and stores checked. But for one brief moment, as the door creaks shut and the fire pops warmly, she can take a single breath of stillness. One heartbeat of quiet before the cycle begins again. The day has truly begun. The longhouse has barely warmed, yet your day has already begun. As a Viking woman, you can't even afford the thought of rest. Dawn has passed, the fire is stoked, and the porridge pot is set. But the hours ahead? They hold no comfort, only endless duty, a rhythm so heavy that survival itself depends on it. Look down at the wool in your lap-rough, unwashed fleece sheared from the sheep. Before this can become clothing, blankets, or sails for ships that carry warriors across oceans, it must pass through your hands. And this isn't a choice. It's an obligation. You sit by the dim light, your spindle whirling, thread twisting between your fingers. Each movement has to be exact. If the wool breaks, the thread weakens. If the thread weakens, the cloth tears. Torn sails mean lost voyages. Torn tunics mean children shivering through harsh winters. The weight of the household even of Viking voyages lies right here in your lap. But here's the thing. Spinning is only the beginning. You might think, once the thread is done, surely she can rest? Not at all. Spinning gives way to weaving, and weaving is a whole new battlefield. Step closer, and you'll hear it, the creak of a loom, taller than you are, standing against the longhouse wall. Imagine your body swaying back and forth as you pass the threads, beating them down with wooden bars. This loom doesn't just produce cloth. It consumes hours, days, even months. A single tunic can take weeks to complete. And while you weave, your mind can't wander, because every single line of thread requires absolute care. Why such effort? Because clothing in the Viking world wasn't a luxury. It was survival. Warm wool tunics kept frostbite at bay. Strong sails carried ships to trade and to raid. Every thread had value, and every mistake could mean weakness when the winter winds howled. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, would you survive this tedium? Would you keep going when your hands blistered and your shoulders ached, but your duties extend far beyond wool? Let's leave the loom and look toward the grinding stone. On the floor lies a heavy quern-two slabs of rock stacked together. The top one must be rotated, again and again, with nothing but the strength of your arms. Into the gap goes grain, and from the edges spills flour. It sounds simple, right? Just grinding. But imagine doing this for hours, every single day. Push, twist, twist the same motion until your arms burn and your back screams. Grain is life. Bread and porridge fill every stomach. But to make enough for even one meal, it takes endless turns of that stone, shoulders straining, sweat dripping into the flour itself. And if you stop, the family goes hungry. Once the grain is ground, another duty is waiting, brewing ale. And here's a truth that might surprise you. In the Viking world, even children drank ale. Why? Because water was often unsafe, filled with sickness. Ale, being boiled and fermented, was cleaner. But brewing wasn't easy. You boil grain in great pots, stir with wooden paddles, and add herbs for flavor. Then comes the waiting, the fermenting, hoping that no contamination spoils the batch. If the ale fails, the household loses more than just a drink. They lose safety. And you, the brewer, bear the blame. All this spinning, weaving, grinding, brewing, and still, children are crying at your feet. A baby clings to you, another tugs your tunic. Motherhood in the Viking Age was shadowed by the fear of loss. Infant mortality was high. Sickness stalked every cradle. You're expected to guard them, feed them, teach them, all while carrying the full burden of household labor. Every cough brings a wave of dread. And what happens when your husband is gone, sailing to foreign coasts? The farm becomes your battlefield. You tend the livestock, repair the tools, and manage the land. You become a farmer, a shepherd, and a carpenter. The weight of survival rests on your shoulders alone, and failure is not an option. Would you endure it? Would you rise before dawn, push through these endless tasks, and still stand tall when darkness returned? As the fire dies low, you pick up the spindle again. The day refuses to end, and your body refuses to quit. The tasks are endless because in this world, survival is endless labor. This was the reality for the Viking woman, the unseen anchor of her entire world. Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found this glimpse into history fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Imagine living your life on a stage where every move you make is watched and judged. This wasn't a play. This was the reality for a Viking woman. Her world, the Longhouse, was not just a home. It was a courtroom where her reputation was on trial every single day under the watchful eyes of family, neighbors, and even the ancestors whose memory hung in the smoky air. To be part of a Viking community was to be caught in a web of expectations. A duty to her husband, her children, her farm, her gods, and the honor of her entire family. A single misstep could bring shame that would ripple through generations. That thought was a constant companion. Honor wasn't just a word. It was survival. A woman with a tarnished name could be cast out, her daughter's futures ruined, her family's alliances shattered. The weight of this honor was an invisible burden she carried from the moment she woke to the moment she collapsed into her straw bed. Marriage itself was rarely a love story. It was politics at its most personal. A young girl knew her hand would be given not to someone who made her heart race, but to the man whose alliance was most useful. Her fate was negotiated like a parcel of land or a chest of silver. She was the bridge between clans, a guarantee of peace, a contract sealed with vows and eventually children. Once married, she became the fierce guardian of that alliance. When her husband was away raiding or trading, she managed not just the farm, but the family's good name. Neighbors watched closely. Did she keep the household in order? Was she faithful? A careless word or a child running wild could ignite gossip, and gossip was a weapon. An accusation of dishonor could cut deeper than any blade. And in the shadows, whispers of sorcery held an even greater threat. A woman who was too independent, too skilled with herbs, or simply too different, could find herself accused of witchcraft. It was a cruel paradox. She held authority, symbolized by the keys hanging from her belt, but that authority was bound by fear. Those keys represented her power over the home, the food, the family's survival. Yet that power ended at the Longhouse door. In the famous sagas, the voices of men fill the pages: warriors, chieftains, and kings. Women's names often appear only in the margins. Still, within the walls of her home, her influence was undeniable. How she managed the food stores through a long winter, how she guided her daughters and disciplined her sons, these quiet decisions could make or break a household. But for all her importance, she often lived in isolation. Scandinavian winters were long, silent, and lonely, burying the world in snow. For months, she might see only her immediate family. In these long, dark periods, doubts could creep in. Was she strong enough? Was she good enough? At seasonal feasts, The social pressure was immense. These weren't moments of relaxation for her. They were examinations. What she wore, how she behaved, the food she brought, everything was noted. Dignity was her shield, and she could never afford to let it down. Every step was a negotiation with expectation. A Viking woman didn't live for herself. She lived for the honor of her kin and the judgment of gods and men. And yet, in those quiet moments by the fire, spinning thread, she might have wondered, who am I, really, beyond all these duties? Will my name ever be remembered? Or will my story, like so many others, be swallowed by the sagas of men, a silent foundation upon which their great deeds were built? Thank you for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past as fascinating as I do, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories hidden in history. The day might have started with grinding grain or weaving cloth, but for a Viking woman, there was always an invisible weight on her shoulders, the constant possibility that everything could be taken away in a single night. Life in the Viking Age was not lived with a sense of safety. Every moment, no matter how ordinary, was underscored by danger. And for women, danger wasn't just about personal survival. It was about protecting children, guarding honor, and preserving the fragile thread of family in a world where violence lurked behind every horizon. Imagine sitting in a longhouse on a winter evening, the fire flickering low, children drowsing beside you, when suddenly the faint sound of boots crunching on snow cuts through the silence. Your heart leaps into your throat. Are they friends returning late, or raiders approaching under the cover of night? This was not a distant fear. Rival clans fought constantly. Raids were about stealing livestock and silver, but also about weakening neighbors and asserting dominance. When men were away, sailing, trading, or raiding themselves, the longhouse became vulnerable. For Viking women, the terror was unique. If raiders came, men might die in combat, but women faced the double horror of survival. Capture meant enslavement, being sold in markets far from home, stripped not only of freedom but of identity itself. Mothers clutched their children tighter, knowing little ones were often taken too. This atmosphere of constant threat shaped every decision Viking women made. Where to store food, where to hide jewelry, even how to prepare children for the possibility of being torn away. Some sagas hint at their terror and resilience. A wife who, when her husband was killed, fled barefoot through snow with 2 children clutched against her. Another, a grandmother who refused to leave her longhouse, choosing death over slavery. These stories remind us that Viking women were not passive victims but active guardians of their families. But not all dangers were men with axes. Some were invisible, whispering from the edges of belief. To survive, Viking women turned to superstition, to charms, and to the mysterious language of runes. Tucked into belts or hidden in carved boxes, they kept small charms, bones etched with runes, pouches of herbs, or fragments of stone said to hold protective power. For a mother, a rune scratched on a piece of driftwood might be the only shield she believed stood between her child and sickness. Yet, this was a double-edged sword. A whisper that a woman had cursed livestock or called storms could mark her as dangerous. Her knowledge of herbs and the unseen world, her greatest strength, could also become her greatest weakness, turning her into a target. Of all the dangers, childbirth was the most constant and deadly. Labor took place in the dim light of the longhouse, with no certainty, only fear. Women died often, and the grief was so common that families had rituals ready for it. Even when childbirth succeeded, infant mortality was devastatingly high. The joy of birth was always tempered by dread. For Viking women, love was always layered with loss. Their lives were tragically short. Many did not live past 35 or 40. Years of labor, childbirth, and malnutrition took their toll. Imagine knowing your life might be half over by your late 20s. How fiercely would you live each day? How carefully would you guard the people you loved? If the day was filled with work, the night was filled with whispers of fear. The longhouse, warm with firelight, was also filled with shadows. Women lay awake beside their children, listening. Was that the wind? Or someone moving through the trees? Was that the groan of timbers, or the weight of a man at the door? Fear was a constant companion. And yet, despite it all, Of raids, of childbirth, of superstition, of the night, Viking women endured. They carried burdens few could imagine, and they did so without sagas written to preserve their names. Their courage was quieter, but no less immense. To rise each morning after nights of terror, to bring children into a world where survival was uncertain, to guard homes and families when danger pressed from every side. This was bravery of a different kind, the bravery not of battle, but of persistence. Night in a Viking longhouse wasn't the quiet escape we might imagine. It was a world of its own, heavy with smoke, crowded with bodies, and filled with a strange mix of safety and unease. For a Viking woman, nightfall wasn't about peace. It was another challenge to survive. The heart of the longhouse was the fire. All day it had cooked food, dried wet wool, and warmed weary hands. Now, at night, the embers still smoldered. A Viking woman's last task was often to stir those embers, feeding them just enough fuel to last until morning. If the fire died, the cold could creep in and kill. So she knelt by the hearth, smoke stinging her eyes, pushing peat or wood into the coals. Her lungs burned, but she couldn't let it go out. Too much depended on it. With the fire tended, families settled into their sleeping places, but privacy, as we know it, didn't exist. The longhouse was one long shared room. Along the sides were wooden benches covered with straw and animal skins. Here, people lay shoulder to shoulder, children tucked between parents for warmth. Even animals might be brought inside during winter, goats, sheep, sharing the air and the smells. A Viking woman often lay in the center of this crush of humanity, the warmth of bodies the only shield against drafts slipping through cracks in the walls. The air inside was heavy, almost suffocating. Smoke from the fire hung low before finding the smoke hole in the roof. The smell of damp wool, unwashed bodies, dried fish, and animals all mixed into a thick fog that never left. A Viking woman learned to breathe this air as naturally as the crisp air outside. But at night, with dozens of lungs breathing in and out, the air grew hotter, thicker. Breathing became a labor. And yet, despite the smoke and heat, the cold always crept in. Scandinavia's nights were long and bitter. Frost formed along the roof beams. Furs and woolen blankets were lifelines. A woman pulled them tight around her children, sometimes layering 3 or 4 together. If there weren't enough blankets, bodies themselves were the insulation, huddling so close that one person's warmth was a gift of survival for another. Silence was a luxury they didn't have. Snoring rumbled from one side. A child whimpered in its sleep. Someone coughed, hacking against the smoke-thick air. A dog growled softly near the door, its ears pricked at some sound outside. The fire crackled and hissed. A Viking woman lay listening, her eyes open. These sounds were a reminder she wasn't alone, yet they also kept her from deep rest. Sleep in a longhouse was shallow, broken. Sometimes stories filled the smoky dark. To quiet restless children, adults whispered tales of gods and monsters, of Odin wandering the world in disguise, of Thor striking giants with his hammer. The woman listened, her mind painting the scenes. Stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons, warnings, and a way to hold on to courage when the night felt too heavy. But even as stories ended, the weight of tomorrow pressed down. She knew dawn would bring more labor, spinning, weaving, feeding, tending. And so she lay in the half-dark, exhaustion pulling at her bones, but sleep refusing to come. As the fire's glow dimmed, shadows thickened. The rafters above looked like twisted arms reaching down. In Norse belief, the night was never empty. Spirits of ancestors and wandering souls could slip close when the fire burned low. Charms were tied to the bed-carved bone, runes scratched into wood-a-thin shield against what moved unseen. Beyond the walls, the night stretched vast and cold. The howl of a wolf, a creak of timber every sound, could be a threat. The dog by the door might stir and growl low, and for a moment all inside would go still, hearts beating fast. Was it just the wind or something more? Eventually, exhaustion dragged even the most restless into a fragile sleep, where dreams were shaped by smoke and story. Children cried out from nightmares of sea serpents. A man jolted awake, shouting as if in battle. A woman's own dreams carried the weight of her waking life. Looms that tangled, children slipping from her grasp. Finally, the longhouse would begin to shift. The fire was stirred again. A rooster crowed outside. The woman rose slowly, muscles stiff, eyes burning. Rest had been little, but it was all she would get. She pulled her shawl tighter and stepped toward the hearth. For a Viking woman, night in the longhouse was never a pause. It was simply another part of survival. Thanks for journeying back in time with us. So here we are, at the end of her day. The embers in the hearth burn low, and the longhouse is wrapped in a haze of smoke and shadows. The air is heavy, the wooden walls creak in the night, and a soft chorus of breathing fills the space. A Viking woman, her shoulders sore, her hands rough from work, finally closes her eyes. And now, you might be asking yourself the question we began with. Would you survive even a single day in her shoes? Think back over the hours we've just walked through. Dawn came not with comfort, but with labor. You rose with her before the men, when the fire was just a dim orange glow. You felt the sting of cold water on your skin as she washed, the dampness of wool clinging to your shoulders. And before there was food, before there was warmth, there was work. Always work. Would you make it past that morning? Think of the weight of her day. Every moment carried purpose, but also pressure. If she wove slowly, her family lacked clothing to trade. If she brewed poorly, there was nothing safe to drink. If she failed in her work, the household might go hungry. That was her battlefield, not swords and shields, but the quiet war of survival fought within walls of timber. And then came the evening. The sun dipped, the wind howled across the fjord, and the longhouse filled with tired voices, soft laughter, and children's whispers. Here she sat, beside the fire she had kept alive all day, her face glowing with the same light that warmed her family. Did she long to step beyond those walls? Perhaps she found enough in these small victories. A child fed, a husband returned, a house still standing against the storm. Survival for Viking women was never about one grand act of courage. It was about 1,000 small acts of endurance, repeated day after day, with no one to sing them into sagas. Their deeds weren't carved into runestones, yet they endured. And in enduring, they shaped the very world the saga celebrated. Now the night settles, the fire smolders. Around her, bodies shift in restless sleep. Privacy is gone. Comfort is scarce. Still, within this dark, she finds a moment of rest. Her eyes close, her breathing steadies, her mind drifts toward dreams. And you, listening now, can you feel it? The hush of the longhouse, the glow of dying embers. So would you survive? Perhaps not, or perhaps you'd find a strength you never knew you had. A strength born not of glory, but of endurance. A strength that whispers rather than shouts. If this journey brought you a little peace, leave a like, a quiet comment, and subscribe for more stories from the past. For now, just close your eyes. Let the longhouse sink into dreams. Tomorrow will come soon enough.